it's a problem.
Because the people in renovation work, they think your design drawing is an accurate drawing, which is not. Doesn't purport to be. And we put it in our action said we will not be giving you a fair file. So when we tell you we won't, don't tell us it's going to cost extra. Well, you know that if you give them a fair file, whatever goes in the asphalt, fix or whatever, safety studio. Grab everybody by the ear and tell them this is their last chance to learn something. This year. Thank you. Humor's better since there aren't very many of you, and we have the lights on this week, so we can actually see you guys for a change, how about you move forward so we can make this a little cozier, and that way we may induce these people to tell us things that they wouldn't tell us if they thought there were a lot of you here.
If we could put the microphones off, that would be.
Well, no, we need the
No?
microphones because,
I see.
that reminds me, Francis. Gene has a very effective assistant who
Who
actually
refused
signed.
to let him sign the thing?
No, she signed, she's terrific.
Oh.
All right, sure.
In fact, I emailed it to you 2 weeks ago. You look at the attachments in your email. You got it.
What's an email attachment?
What's an email attachment? No, I'll do it again, but
Okay.
you do have it.
Okay, we are very lucky this week. Oh, so the reason that they want this is that they record everything.
I see.
So we do have to watch a little bit what
All
we
right.
say, but
Well,
I
it's
don't
gonna be
take
very
that too
boring
seriously.
then. All right.
As those of you who
Okay.
were in my class last year, you know I don't take that seriously at all. Okay, we're very lucky today, or the few of you who are here, and I hope more of you show up. Well, you can't, I hope others of you show up. You can't, more of you show up. I think all of you, each of you is here. Okay, we're very lucky today to have two really special superstars to talk to us. We have Francis Halsband, who's one of the two founding partners of Kliment and Halsband, whose work I'm sure you're familiar with. They do a lot of really great campus buildings, office buildings, all kinds of things. And Gene Kohn, the founding partner and chairman of Kohn, Pedersen, Fox, which I would assume you all know pretty well, and has built great buildings all around the world. And those of you who took pro practice know that I'm very opposed to the notion of you can either do terrific work and be poor or do bad work and make a living. These two have proved that you can do good work and make a living and do well, and that we don't need to operate as though we're on some alternate universe. So let's start off with some first things, and the first obvious question is, what do two people who have had very, very successful practices, what would they suggest to you? What would they suggest to you?
Am I doing suggestions first? Okay. So I heard, Glenn Lowry was in a very controversial discussion last week about what to do about the folk art museums, big deal, and I'm not talking about that today. Oh, yes, you were there. So he was accused of not being interested in architecture as an art, and he said, well, architecture is an art in that you have aesthetic responses to architecture, and that's very important, but it's different from all the other arts because it has a use and it changes in time. And I thought that's deeply significant. So I think if you're thinking about architecture and thinking about being an architect, I would say there's two things you have to think about. One of them is talent. You've got to have talent to go out there and design something, and you've got to have objectivity. And you may not have both of those in the same person. You may have a whole group of people who are all very talented and will never get anywhere in life. And even worse, you could have a group of objective people and they will never make it as a firm. But if you have a couple of each, I mean, I'm exaggerating, maybe you could be talented and actually be objective too, it's possible. But you really need to be able to see that everything you do has some relevance to what's out there, and you need somebody to say, okay, that's a great scheme, but you know what, we can't sell it to the client, or you know what, that's a great scheme, but we can't afford it, or that whole dialogue, I think, has to take place in your office or in your head, so that by the time you go out and present something to a client, to the world, it answers all of those questions. It's beautiful and it's useful. So I think you almost always, you have to find a collaborator who's your laugh test, someone that can say to you, yeah, okay, but let's get real. Or, sometimes, in olden times, your mother would do that for you, like you explain something to your mother and she's like, what? What? So you need that person that's saying, what? So that's my advice.
Good advice.
Right.
Well, I think it's important to realize the importance of the profession and what we really do. I think too many architects view themselves too low in the pecking order of society and the value they create. If you think about it, we have very few clients in proportion, let's say, to a doctor who may see many, many patients over his career or her career, or an accountant or a lawyer, but we affect far more people over a much longer period of time by the things we do. And whether we're creating a place to work or a place to live, or a hospital to get cured in, or a school to learn in, we affect the people who are in that space. We affect them mentally, physically. We're about their health and their well-being. And what we don't fight for, because sometimes we're so involved in the image or the sculptural aspect of architecture, we fail to understand that what we are creating affects people who are in the building, living in, working, whatever they might be doing, or seeing it and experience it from the street. So we have to realize we are doing important things. We are not some artist starving, and that's a good thing. We are doing much more than that. So we are when we create a building, take this space. I'm not sure how you feel in it, but it does affect you. It affects how you see, how you hear, how you think. It affects how you feel about yourself. Many years ago, I had a client named Stanley Marcus of Neiman Marcus, and he said one thing to me that I've never forgotten. He said, when you're in a great space, in a great building, you feel good about yourself. And when you feel good about yourself, and if you're shopping, you really shop. If you don't feel good about yourself, you're somewhat insecure, you don't. So his goal in creating great stores was to make a place that you felt good. When you walked in, you stood straight, you smiled and said, oh, that's the best shirt I've ever seen or the best suit. Unfortunately, working for Stanley Marcus was more expensive because I had to buy a suit every time I saw him. He said, Gene, I have the perfect suit for you. And then he came the shoes, the shirts, and the ties. And so I lost a lot of money on that project. But, and I never wore the suits because I actually didn't like them. But anyhow, I just wanted to make that point because I teach a course at Harvard which is about the creation of value or the value of design. And when you really start to think about it, we play a key role. So if you're talking with real estate developers who are about to create some wonderful mixed-use project or apartment building, they're depending on the architect. I just talked to a client yesterday. He said, well, what's your goal? He said, my goal, Gene, is to make $3,000 a square foot on this building. That's his goal. But I want a beautiful building that's going to do it. So all of a sudden, there's a value. We are going to create a building that makes $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, makes them very wealthy. But hopefully does much more than that. Makes a great place to live or a great place to see from a distance. So you got to think of when you're studying architecture and what you're about to be, you're becoming somebody that's very important to society. And you have to think about that. You're not just, don't think about being a starving artist or doing some pretty picture or pretty, you are going to be creating things that are going to last a long time and affect a lot of people.
So, how do you convince a client of that? I mean, it's easy for us to convince each other that because it's so important, we deserve to be properly compensated for it. But they often have a different goal, and they're not so willing often to share that $3,000 a foot that's worth it because of what you've created.
Right. Well, it starts, I have a friend who was a client. He's not a client now, he's more of a friend. But he said, Gene, you know, when architects come to me, they're so anxious to get this job, they almost do it for free, so you wonder why we should bother paying. They seem so thankful. They have an opportunity, and it's a bad word to use. I'm so happy about this opportunity to design this. It's like, boy, that's the reward. We just gave you the job to do. We don't need to be paid. So, in other words, we devalue what it is we're actually doing because we're so thankful and appreciative to get the project. And you'll find, particularly when you're young and starting out, that's only normal, that you're going to be pretty thankful you get a new building to do, or any building. So I think that's part of the issue, is that we immediately devalue the fee by the fact that we're so excited to have it. And then, unfortunately, all the other architects are competing maybe and cutting, and they get to the fee status. They start to cut fees in order to get the job. And yet the people they're cutting the fees for can afford to pay far more than the fee that you would even ask for. You know, many of these developers are worth billions and millions, so that's a peanut. I mean, on a 3,000 square foot return per, you know, they're not, if you get $5 a square foot or $10 a square foot, you think you're doing great. That's all you're going to get out of it. The developer is going to end up with $1,000 in profit. So I'm not opposed to anybody making profit, but I do think that the architects need to be rewarded and not feel guilty about getting good fees for what they're contributing. And they are creating value. So,
But I'm going to say two things. I'm in a different world. We don't work for developers at all. We only work for universities, Florida churches, other institutions. And the fee structure is more or less fixed. I mean, you pretty much know, there's a very narrow range that you can go slightly above and they'll negotiate you down. If you go lower, they think you don't know what you're doing.
but they don't raise your fee.
And they won't give you the, so fee competition is not really where we find ourselves. And we rarely find ourselves having to persuade somebody that we're right because there's an interview process. And I think when you go through an interview process, there's a matching of, chemistry and ideals and goals. So by the time you're hired, you've established some sort of a bond with that person that's on the other side of the table, and you have some common agreement of what you're there for. So if you come in and say, well, I'm going to do a great big green building for you, and they don't want a green building, you're not going to get the job. So you never had a chance to persuade them, that the green building is the best. I mean, colored green, whatever. Purple building, yeah. So I think that a lot of that natural selection takes place long before you get the job.
Yeah.
So you have to be ready to keep walking in and meeting failure. You can meet failure because they've decided to hire their cousin, or they've decided to hire Eugene because they like him better, or a lot of things are going to happen. But once you or their uncle.
Yeah,
but once you've got the job, there's already a kind of a level of trust.
Which goes back to something that I'm a firm believer in, and that is all architects are different, and an architect who might do great with a developer, one architect, Gene has been wildly successful with developers, including the one you saw last week, Michael Dennis, who is a friend, but was also a major client. And other architects like Francis and myself just don't even know how to talk to those people.
So true.
And I'm lost with them. Gene is very comfortable, and I'm lost. We're very different personalities. So part of it is you got to know yourself to know what your personality is and with whom you will be comfortable and fit.
Although, we do work for corporations.
Yes, and you do museums,
hospitals,
and
airports, museums. So we do have a variety.
Yeah.
I find, though, that there's a common thread. If the client really wants to achieve something special with their building, there is a common denominator. Now, fees are less of an argument with not all corporations, some, and certainly less with institutions. But we're competing for a big job with one of the banks, and it's all about bidding. I hate the word bidding, but your procurement department is who you deal with. And, you can sell toilet paper or your services as an architect. They buy it the same way, which is unfortunate. But fees is one aspect of this. I think when I stress fee, is that we do create value, we should get paid fairly, and we shouldn't be ashamed to do well. There's no excuse for it.
part of the reason that Wall Street seems to succeed is they have one goal, and they're very focused on that one goal. And it's much more complex when you have two goals, because on the one hand, you don't want to pretend like the client, you're doing the client a favor to work for them. Many clients are very turned on, and reasonably so, by architects who really want to do their project. That all other things being equal, I'm convinced that an architect who displays to a client that they really want to do that project is going to get it over one who says, if I get it, fine. If I don't, I'll live. So they do, and I think it's just human nature, when somebody sees that somebody has two goals, they kind of play one goal against the other. Whereas if you came in with only one goal and they needed you, it would be very different.
Sure.
So, but that is just what it is, because we do have passion about it, and if we don't, we wouldn't do it.
Right.
So one of the things that occurred to me is, Francis and Gene both have, offices that have long histories, have cultures, and to change them at this point would be very difficult. So I asked them both, knowing what you know now, if you were going to start from scratch, as many of you are, how would you do it? What would you do today, different or the same? And I'm sure there's some of each. What would you do today if you were starting an office with what you know now and with the world as it is now, which is different than when we all started.
Who do you want first?
Who won? Who's brave?
I would do what Gene did, I think. I think we started out as
Lean forward so this will
all right.
be
So we
important for
started out as
posterity.
two designers working for Aldo Jergola, who was the chairman here at that time. And one day we woke up and we said, my God, we could do this stuff better than Aldo does it. Let's go out and start our own office. So we did. But we had to invent how to be that objective part that I was talking about before. We didn't have a business partner that was part of it. So we spent a long time just, screwing around and trying to figure out how to pay the bills. I mean, if I were doing it again, I would look for that objective person. I mean, I'm sure there are objective people with talent out there. We've got a lot of them working with us right now. But I would look for that person that was really fascinated with the structure of making an office run and have that person be one of the partners from the beginning. But it took us, 15 or 20 years to find people like that. And now we have them and they're great, But to have the whole business piece of it functioning at the same time, I think we would have had a less horrendous first couple of years. So that's
Okay. My answer may be a little longer.
Good. No, we have lots of time. I have to be someplace by 6.
I do too. Well, actually, for me, it goes back a long time, and certain experiences I had. One, the most experience between undergrad and grad, I spent 3 years in the Navy, and ended up, after 8 years, as a lieutenant commander. And I only tell you that I learned about leadership. Mm-hmm. But I learned about different ways to lead, because the military, I had 3 stripes, actually 2.5, but looked like 3. So people would do what I asked if I just said do it. But I never did that. I always said Joe or Jim or whoever, but all men back then, this needs to be done, unless it was a crisis in the middle of a battle or something. I asked them to do it as a nice person. And the loyalty I began to build, I had 150 men at that time under me. The loyalty I began to build became very visible. These people would do anything that I asked because I treated them with respect and never ordered them to do anything, but asked them and it made sense. So I said, well, if I ever were to start my own firm, I wanted to keep that in mind. My mother was also a phenomenal influence because she was a great leader. She ran back when women didn't run businesses. She ran a major business in dress design and fashion. She was also an artist who had a show at the Guggenheim, I don't know whether you remember, at age 100, but ran the family, a big family at the time, not just immediate, but large. And I watched how she handled people. She treated everybody who she worked with, from the packer to the most important designer, with respect. Never showed anything but respect and decency. And again, loyalty. So I said, boy, this is really a powerful lesson. And then I began, as I was studying architecture, then getting involved as working for other firms, it was always about the individual. Because in school, it's your scheme. It's my scheme. This is what I do. And so you begin to think of yourself as the individual and the creator of this wonderful thing. But the reality is architecture isn't about one person. It takes many, many people to do great buildings, and by the time they're built, it takes thousands of people who are ultimately involved. One of the most unbelievable achievements when it's done well. So I began to say that if we're going to do a firm, it isn't going to be a one-name firm, because I started, although Bill and Shelley were friends and I asked them to join, but I was older. Shelley and I were the same, but I seemed older.
It's the gray hair.
Yeah, I did have gray hair. So I said, we're going to be a team. And it's not about an individual. And we're going to share credit with everybody who works with us. Not about I get the credit or Bill got the credit. And Bill is a brilliant designer. And I had won 2 national AI awards before, but Bill was a better designer, I thought. So I said, when we started, Bill, you're going to lead the design. And I'm going to run the firm and try to get the work, because nobody else could do that at the time. And Shelley was a fabulous manager. But that's different than a leader. He could run things, manage things. And we became one person because the 3 skills all blended together. And when we were together, you couldn't tell. It was like one person, but one firm united. And clients liked that. And then we always gave credit. And we started the firm, and that's why when you asked the question out there, I said, I'm not sure I would change it. Because what we did was we said, when we're going to hire young people, we're going to get the best people we can, and never hire somebody we don't think is as good or better than we are or could be. The mistake most people make is their ego's so strong they want people not quite as good as them to be around them, so they're always the top. I wanted people smarter than me, better designer than me, always to be around me, because that's the way to succeed and build a better firm. So what we said, we're going to invite young people to join us. We're going to allow them to grow and one day be partners and one day lead the firm. Okay? We're going to all involve with design, management. We're going to be involved in all these things. And again, quoting the Navy one more time, is that the Navy had a way of operating, it had two duties. One was line duty and one was staff duty. So line duty had anything to do with running the ship, firing missiles or being shot at, whatever. That was the line duty. Staff duty was worrying about staff, getting people, food, supplies, weapons, all the things you need to run the ship. So, well, a firm has that. You have people who need to do the design and do the work, but then you need to worry about where you do the work and the office and all the equipment and paying the bills and, or more important, get the client to pay their bills, all those things. So I said, we each have to have a line duty and a staff duty. So the line duty became the project and the staff something to support the firm. So we organized on that basis. And to this day, we have grown over 600 people in 6 offices and working in 41 countries, 26 currently. And this firm operates so smoothly. And the talent we've assembled, I mean, they're phenomenal, better than I by a long shot. But they are really good. And so we can take on projects that are as complex as Hudson Yards, mixed use, 10, 12 million square feet, and all over China doing projects that are amazing, or Japan. Our first project in Japan was over 5 million square feet over railroad tracks, in a country that we had never worked in. So the point I'm making is that the talent was there, the structure was there, and the firm has succeeded, both in its quality of its work, not every project's great, but really we try hard, and two, financially the firm's done well. So, and everybody benefits. The rewards go to everybody. Titles, profits, bonuses, whatever. So everybody is happy. I mean, if you talk to any one of our people, I can show you letters. When they leave, they cry because they have to move, because they just love being in the firm. So I would have a hard time, Paul, saying we should do something totally different, because we built it around not being, I have great respect for a Frank Gehry or Norman Foster or Zaha Hadid, but we're not that firm. We are about a team who is very talented, who cares about quality, and works very hard to achieve it. And everybody benefits. So.
Well, there are, it's like furniture. You're always going to want a chair that's 17 inches high or a table that's 29 or 30 inches high unless you're standing with. I mean, some things don't change because they're people. And people are all wired the same, more or less. And so therefore, those kinds of values, will, they worked 100 years ago and they'll work 100 years from now. But a lot of the world does change, and while some things like those values, stay the same, other things do change. And I guess the question is, where do you see things going? Sorry.
Where do things going?
Before we go,
Where do I think? No, I'm good.
No.
Keep it.
Well,
Where do I think things are going?
yeah. Well, you didn't answer the other question, actually.
You didn't answer it, Mike.
Right,
I went
about
Would you change
what
the
would
firm?
you do differently if you were starting
no,
now?
I would hire Gene to work with me. What do you- Perfectly clear.
She'd be a delight to work with.
So if, okay.
What do you want next?
Well, okay, let's change entirely. One of the things that I'm a big preacher of is that we are all different. You guys are all different, and to all try to be the same thing and to have the same kind of client, to do the same kind of buildings, whatever, is obviously a ridiculous mistake. Clients are different, and we're all different. That said, we've all worked with good clients and bad clients, and there are some tip-offs about, my father used to say, if you go to bed with dogs, you wake up with fleas. And
Or bones.
or whatever. Different kinds of clients have different goals, and we, personality-wise, are probably suited to different kinds of clients. That said, though, there are some common denominators about good clients and bad clients.
Good clients and bad clients.
Well, I mean, for instance, I always say, if a potential client walks in the door and they tell you how stupid their last 5 architects are, he just held up a sign saying, I'll be saying that about you next, and I'm trouble. So any client who brags about how bad their other architects are, that's ego bait, don't fall for it.
So what, you want a definition of a bad client or a good
Yeah,
client?
well, both.
Well, see, so most of my clients are not individual people, they're committees. They're committees of trustees, they're committees of deans and faculty trying to build something. They're committees of the guys that run the snow plows and the universities. So I don't have good clients and bad clients. I have a huge number of people that it's up to me, actually, to organize into some kind of a group that can make decisions and go forward, because there's rarely someone else that's going to do that, but hardly ever. So it's not about good and bad. It's about running a kind of a process in which you can hear everybody so that they know they've been heard and they stop feeling like, me, you didn't hear from me. And then once you've heard from them, you kind of pick out what are the good things, get everyone to agree and keep going forward. So if a project fails, it's my fault. It's not the fault that the guy with the snowplow said he didn't like the way that I did the road. It's my fault for not hearing that and working it in. So I totally reject the notion of bad clients. I mean, or there are people that change their mind all the time and they have to be shown up.
I think
If
the bad
you put
clients.
them in a group,
I think the bad clients are the ones that we all had early on, and that we all learned, how to not work for them again, or we rose up to the kind of clients who wouldn't have the kinds of businesses or institutions that we now work for if they had behaved so badly on a long-term basis.
Yeah, but I guess, I'm not sure, is it a leadership skill? It's more than that, right? Like knowing how to get people into the mix to make decisions. Frequently, if you have a lot of trouble at working in a university because nobody can agree, the answer is to bring students into the mix, because everybody behaves better when there are students in the room, right? They're all trying
Including us.
It's
We
right.
don't normally behave
No,
remotely this
They're all
well.
trying to show that they're mature grown-ups and they know how to behave in front of students. When students are not in the room, they all carry on like 3-year-olds themselves. So you have to know that if things are going badly and there's a lot of ego happening in the room, time to bring in a group of students to be participants in that meeting. That's something you can do.
I hope you're all hearing
this.
This is a lesson for a lot of other things about the power that you have as students that you don't use remotely.
Oh, totally, yes, absolutely, right, everyone's afraid.
Well,
And
they don't know that.
They don't know that,
Now,
right.
one thing I failed to mention was Francis was dean of Pratt School of
And that's how
Architecture.
I ran, turn off the microphone. When I had huge problems with the faculty for being unwilling to change anything, I immediately created a student senate, and I said to the faculty, the student senate is going to meet with the faculty senate from now on. That's what we're going to do. So when a faculty member would say, I can't teach on Tuesdays, there's an alternate street parking, I can't, the students would say, what are you talking about? And things would happen. So it's always good. So you have to be able to bring in people to make things happen. I think you were describing running an office that way, where you're hearing everything from everybody. I think that's also true with clients. It's up to you to bring them all along. It's up to you to also have that, what do I call it, lack of ego? No, it's actually total confidence. You have to have total confidence that you put up a drawing and everybody starts picking it apart. You have to hear that and say, okay, I'll come back with another one. You're going to like the next one even more. Actually, so anecdote time. So for a long time, I've worked at Brown University as the person that helps them hire architects. So I've seen a lot of fabulous.
This is the person you want to know, obviously.
Right. Yeah. I'm here. Call me up. Right. So we hired a lot of famous architects, and I've watched them all interact with client groups. So one of my current absolute favorite architects actually is Liz Diller, because we hired her only 5 years ago, to do the first building that she had ever done, where they did the working drawings themselves. It was like, it's a creative arts building at Brown. So she had never really done a building before, so she came up with Charles Renfro, and they would make presentations, and they would show fabulous things, and then we, as the clients, would have to say to them, this is really fabulous, but you can't have a glass stair in a university, because it's like not, you can do it in a museum, but in a university, it's, you know, the students are gonna like wreck it, and things will happen, and no one will take care of it. And instead of fighting us and saying, oh no, but this is brilliant, and I just did this stair at ICA Boston, and you're gonna love it, she would say, okay, we'll think of something else. And she'd come back 3 weeks later, and the glass stair had become something made out of, I don't know, like the gel that bicycle seats are made of. And she would just use that as a point to invent something else. That, to me, is a real architect. So that's the answer.
You know, going back to what Frances was saying earlier about how when she and Robert started, they were both designers, and they were I was at a speed mentoring thing down at the AIA the other night, which is always quite fascinating, and somebody else was there, and he was a graduate, I think, in '75 or so from GSAPP, and he was saying when he was in school, somebody told him something really interesting, which was, if you want to succeed, learn how to be really expert in something nobody else wants to do. And that's a little bit like being the business person in an architecture firm. I mean, when I asked those of you who are in my class what you want to be doing in 10 years, not a single one of you said, I want to be the business partner in a firm. Nobody said that, right? And that's part of what's wrong with school culture, is it teaches you that you're all the same, and that there's one great thing to do, and that's be like Howard Rourke, who, as I've reminded you, didn't end up so well. And everything else is kind of second rate. And that's a really dumb notion. So I would suggest that any of you whose mind turns more towards the business end of doing things, you will have a much easier time finding terrific partners, whatever, and being the leader than if you all run like Lenin.
The leader is rarely the design architect, right? Like even in my office, like the person that runs meetings and makes things happen, rarely me. You know, it's one of my partners who says, and now I'm going to bring Frances out. You know, it's a different.
And you tiptoe out.
Wait till you see this. But no, it's a different. It's different than what you do in school. It's absolutely right.
Well, I mean, school basically teaches you a very important part of architecture that you will not learn elsewhere, but it's only a little tiny part, and that is how to design. I mean, that's basically what school teaches, and pretends that there is nothing else. And you better wake up to the fact that there is, because that's going to either make it or break it for you.
Well, because it takes a lot of people to do anything. I mean, even the smallest project takes more than just one person.
Right.
To do it.
Right.
So,
And being able to work as part of a group is a really critical factor, because as everybody has said, nothing gets built by yourself. Or, I mean, Glenn Murcutt. Other than Glenn Murcutt,
yeah.
you know, yeah.
You believe that story of his? How does he get all that work done if he's always in the air going?
Well,
to
no,
give
no,
lectures?
because my understanding, well, that's now, but for
Yeah,
historically, my
Okay,
understanding was
all
he
right.
did one project at a time.
Yes,
He did it
okay.
all by himself, and
Okay.
when he was done with that, then he'd start the next.
Okay,
But he wouldn't
right.
start the next one till
It was finished.
the first one was done.
Right,
And
okay.
I mean, even if this is totally apocryphal, what a
All right.
great story.
Okay, it's a great story. All right, I give up. I give up.
Okay, does anybody, okay, you've heard from us. How about we hear from you guys a little bit? You will never again, I guarantee you, not for the next 25 years will you have this opportunity again.
And probably certainly not interested.
Can you guys talk a little bit about your decisions to start your own firm after working for somebody else, and if you had ideas about the kind of scope of work that you wanted to tackle, or the way that you were going to build your firm, or was it, yeah.
Wow.
That's a great question.
Um,
How do you know that it's time or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know that it's time when you get to that point where you say, wait a minute, I could do this better than they're doing it. I think that's
That
an
does happen,
instinct
yeah.
that comes to you, but, okay. But, boy, I wish I had a career path. I mean, then the next thing you need is an opportunity. You need a client. You can't really start a firm if you don't have a job, I think. unless you have a big pile of money that you've been saving all along that's going to pay for you to open an office and print stationery and walk around talking to people. So you've got to have a client from somewhere. I really think that's
It helps.
true. It helps.
But we did, actually.
You didn't? We did. Well, we had a friend of ours said, oh, my cousin wants to build a house. Right? So we thought, all right, that's it. That at least there's something to do when we're sitting there. Or, and then Robert played tennis with this woman who was the head of the museum, and next thing we knew, we had a little museum to do. So I
But
think,
she let her win.
of course, the guy's a born leader. He knew she had to win. Did you start it with? Well, you must have had.
Yeah,
some
I'll tell you how we
money
started.
saved.
No, we didn't either. I had no money. But it was just a gut feel. So I've done most of my things in life with gut, so that's how I feel. But let me tell you, the circumstances were kind of interesting. It was 1976. None of you were around, I don't think. Maybe a few of you back there. But in 1973 to 76 was a horrendous recession. And at one point in New York, 60% of architects were unemployed, did not have a job.
That's when
And-
we started. So actually, we thought no one had work, so we might as well
Well,
not have work.
it's a
too.
good time to start, right. So I was president of another firm at that time, and the only other partner. And we didn't agree on how to get through this difficult period. He had, I won't mention his name, but he had taken money out to buy a vineyard in the middle of a terrible recession, leaving no cash for to run a firm, so a little bit difficult.
Thoughtful.
Huh?
Very thoughtful of
Very
him.
thoughtful. And, maybe the wine business would help eventually, but, so I had sour grapes, so to speak. So it seemed to me this was a good time to maybe make a change. Now, remember, I was head of this firm, and I was also a partner. My parents and my wife at the time thought I was an idiot who leaves in a recession to start a new firm. But I had done a lot of reading about companies who started in the Depression and how well they did. So if you were to think of everything's at the bottom, when the economy starts to pick up, if you're established, you're going to rise with it. If you start, and by the way, so this was the key. People, potential clients, what I did is called on all the key people I knew, but I didn't ask for a job. I asked for advice. The thing, just remember this. When you ask for advice from somebody who is pretty powerful, they have the ability to make their advice come true one day. And that's what they all like to do. When somebody asks me for advice, I want it to come true. So I do my best if somebody wants a job to get them a job, or so I look like my advice was good. And that's what most people do. So I went around, I got, including Stanley Marcus, president of AT&T, who I knew, and people like that. And they all came through over the next year or two. But we started without any actual job. And I just believed we would do well. It's one of those things, you just believe something and you did it. I had to convince Bill Pedersen. He was less optimistic, and, but he was much younger. And Shelley was willing to do it. So we started, and this would be, I had a friend who was very wealthy. He said, not an architect, he said, Gene, your success will be based on the work you turn down. Now, we had no work, no money, and I had 3 kids in school, and so a little bit worried. And he's telling me, turning down work's a good thing. I'm saying, well, you got to be kidding me. First job offer came within a few days of starting the firm. It came from Iran, and I had worked in Iran previously. And this banker said, Gene, I want you to do our headquarters. And we're going to give you, for the early design, $1.1 million or $1.2 million, something pretty nice back in 1976. And I said, fabulous, first job. But then I thought, it's not a good idea, because we wanted to build a firm in New York, and we didn't want to be, and I knew what it took, because I'd worked in Iran, to fly back and forth, and how the Iranians, very tough negotiators. They may say, we'll give you this, but by the time they're done, they're not giving you that.
And the Shah was still around.
And the Shah was still
Yeah.
around. But it was a very dangerous time. So we eventually turned it down. I remember we had no office, so we called him from Shelley Fox's kitchen. Still remember it as if we were I was leaning against the refrigerator because I was so upset we had to give up this fee, and tell him we were turning it down. So I called, and it was a Saturday, explained to him that we just couldn't do it I made up the reasons, turned it down. And I was really ill that night, no work, no. The next morning in the New York Times real estate section, Sunday, was a little story that ABC had bought an army on the Upper West Side at 66th, between Central Park West and Columbus. And so I knew a VP there, Shelley knew one, and we called them and said, look, we have this great new firm, we'd love to do this job. It was small, it was 43,000 square foot army they were going to convert to a 1 hour long soap opera studio, which I'm sure you all watch. And it was perfect because it was a linear building where you could have all these sets and the camera just goes up and down doing the different sets. So we said we can do that. And
Of course, you had never done one.
we never done one, but we could do it.
Right.
And we interviewed and we got the job. Now we discovered we were the only ones they interviewed. So if we had lost, it was pretty bad. Losing to no competition. But anyhow, we got this job. And no sooner we got the job, they also gave us the master plan to do for the Upper West Side. And it led to 17 buildings over 12 years or something. And ABC paid their bill within 10 days. And they negotiated a very fair fee, actually higher than I expected. So we got a very good fee. They paid us on time. It allowed us to exist. Now, this came because we turned down the job in Iran, because I wouldn't have bothered with a little armory if we're doing a big bank in Iran. So my friend's advice already kicked in. Now, this gave me, this is the most amazing. You know, in life you talk about you come to a fork in the road and you're not sure you go right or left. If you go right to do the right thing, you always wonder whether left would have been better, or vice versa. This is a case where I can tell you we made the right decision from day one, because that little ABC commission, within the first year, I got a call from Chicago, a developer who I had asked for advice, and I knew, called and said, Gene, I understand you guys are experts with ABC. You know ABC. We want to keep them, get them in our new building we're going to build on Wacker Drive. We'd like you to do the design. Now, I didn't bother to tell them we were not experts with ABC. We just got the job. But we did know two VPs, so that was fair. So here we are designing 333 Wacker Drive for ABC in Chicago as a New York firm, the first New York firm to work in Chicago. We're like new. I mean, we're still wet behind the ears. I mean, nobody knew us, including our families. I mean, and so here we are, this new firm in Chicago. And Perkins & Will was a fine firm. They became the production or the architect of record. But they treat us with great respect, and that's another story. So here we get 333 Wacker Drive, which ABC ultimately didn't take, but Tom Klesnick, who was in charge of the urban investment, wanted to build it, so he built it. And that little building led to getting Procter & Gamble's world headquarters. We got interviewed, and we beat Pay and Skidmore, and we were a young firm. And that led to the World Bank, getting in the World Bank competition in Washington, which we won. And we got a Goldman Sachs headquarters in London, followed by a bank, the DG Bank, a project we won in Frankfurt, all in the first few years. All because we didn't go to Iran. We stayed home, got this little ABC project, which just opened all these doors. And it was like, I always believed the key to success was not to keep doing the same projects, but to jump steps. And so exactly what happened. Now, we were lucky because it wasn't just pure luck that each time we got a new building, it was like 1 million square foot headquarters. And so without going through all that, the decision was right on because it led to today. And I can trace all the successes all the way back to this little
So good.
ABC.
So there are two major lessons. Because when we started our firm, Jack Robertson was working for the Shah of Iran. It was like the same time.
I used to see Jackie in Iran all the time.
And he said to us, why don't you come with me to Iran, and we're going to do all this fabulous work together. And we did exactly the same thing. We sat at a kitchen table. It's unbelievable.
That's where you make your best decisions.
Totally. If you don't have a kitchen table, don't even think of having a firm. And we said, if we do this, if we go to Iran, we're never going to get a start in New York. And we
Exactly.
called Jack up and we said, we can't come. And he said, what's the matter with you? I'm working for the richest guy in the world. And it's fabulous. We said, no, we're not going.
And the story is that the Shah, within 5 or 6 months, was booted out. We would not have been paid
Right.
for the work we had done, and we'd have been
Yeah.
nowhere.
Yeah. So lesson one, stick with what you know. I think I'm hearing
That's
that
good, yeah.
loud and clear. And the other thing I'm hearing loud and clear is salesmanship and marketing. Work doesn't come in by itself. I think you have to go out and let everyone know that you're starting a firm. You have to let everyone know that you're a great architect. You have to ask advice of everyone. I mean, some of our first work came because we were both teaching at Columbia, I think, and Jim Polshek was the dean here at that time, and he changed the rules. Up until that point, if you taught at Columbia, you were not allowed to work at Columbia. And he said, wait a minute, that's crazy. It should be the other way around. So he changed the rules, and next thing we knew, we were interviewed for a job at Columbia. And
The computer building.
no, it was before
Oh,
that. It was
before that.
renovating a dormitory on
Ah.
114th Street. Computer science was like 5 years, 5 or 6
Ah.
years. By then, we had a reputation for doing university buildings. You see. so we were interviewed, and we got this first job because actually, so now we come back to the story of clients again. The people on the other side of the table were all vice provosts, and they had no idea how to hire an architect. And one of them said to us after we got the job, well, you seemed like you really wanted it, and you seemed really interesting, and Robert was wearing a really great tie. He said, and I thought, how do you make a decision? It's about design. Let's hire the guy with the really good tie, So in that kind of very, tentative way, we got to do this building at Columbia, which immediately started winning prizes. And then we were able to say to the next set of clients, oh, of course we do university buildings. We've done one.
We just wanted to work there.
So it was not something we could have predicted. We couldn't have said, oh, let's go into the university architecture business. But once we were in it, it just kept
But it's fun to think
snowballing.
about the break.
So that,
open
yeah,
the
and
door.
so then we started visiting all of our
Yeah.
friends and saying, well, we'd like to come and see, how do you work up here at Harvard? We'd like to come and talk to you and learn from you.
Well, the old expression, when you want advice, ask for money. When you want money, ask for advice.
Ah, that's beautiful. I
That's
never
right,
heard that.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
perfect.
That's what I did.
That's perfect, yeah. So
Other
marketing
questions?
is huge.
Right. Yes, Brett.
So many of us come to GSAPP because it's a school that doesn't tell you who you are, who you need to be, what architecture is. And there may be some of us who kind of know what they want and have a few steps laid out for how to get there. What sort of advice would you give to students who are just about to embark on their first steps in their career and are interested in a lot of different things and are kind of
Oh.
curious?
Should I go to work for you or for me? What do you think? That you go to work for me? You should visit a lot of firms. It's like visiting colleges. The minute you walk in the door of a firm, you will know, I want to be here, I don't want to be here. I mean, there's something about the atmosphere. You'll get it. It's just like when you're looking at colleges. So I think if you just visit a lot of places and walk around and see, they'll be evaluating you, of course, at the same time. But I think you will see where the matches happen. I mean, you'll find out yourself that what you like and what you don't like. How can you tell if you have nothing to,
But something,
So-
well, I'd like your opinion on something. Something that I've been pushing very hard is take the blinders off. Don't think you just have to, now you have IDP issues and so on, I'll grant you.
yeah.
And so but put that aside for the moment because there are ways of dealing with that. I've always been a big believer of try other things. Work for a contractor, work for a developer. And so some students say, well, if I worked for a contractor, wouldn't that be a black mark against me if I were looking for a job later on in an architect's office? I've always said, well, it shows to me that you know about something other than what we already know about.
Actually, that's good. And one of my real pieces of advice is if you are a young architect working in an office, get the hell out of the office as much as you can. Because I think in my career, I was a landmarks commissioner, I was a teacher, so I was doing everything I could to understand how architecture fits into a bigger world. So if you're sitting on the client side, you get a whole different view of how an architect can fit in and do something usable or useful. If you're sitting on the town board or the community board or working with a contractor or working on the clients, a lot of architects are working in universities and they're my clients, right? So how are they thinking? So the more you can do to be out in the non-architect world all the time, trying to do that translation thing, I think is absolutely critical.
Although
That's
I may take a slightly different
Yeah.
view. I would think as you get out of school, it's important for the first couple of years to be in a firm, just to understand the connection between the things you've done at school and what you've learned, and how it fits in for an architectural planning firm. Because if you take the break too quick, and you, let's say, work for a con, which is a good idea, you may lose the connection, and getting back into the job is tougher. In other words, if you spend 2 or 3 years in any firm, small or large, and, it depends what kind of work you want to do and how you feel, and then you say, you know what, I want to do something different, and you go out and you work for a contractor or work for a client, a developer, or maybe go back to grad school or whatever it might take other. Like I have a lot of our people who have masters in architecture now going back to Harvard Business School or Wharton, still want to stay as architects, but they want to understand the clients better. So they're going to come back hopefully and work with us after. So, but I do think the first 2 or 3 years out of school, when you're a bit insecure, you still are, because you're not sure how your school really, what you learned here fits in to the bigger picture, you'll get a better idea of it. Now we, as all firms do, we teach, we have training programs and lectures, and education is a big part of the firm. And at night at 5 o'clock or 6, we have classes, classes in computers, new software, as well as design discussions or, technical, learning about detailing. So I think it's like being back at school, but you're getting paid, and you're learning, and you're being exposed to many other people and terrific talent and projects done all over the world. Even if you're not traveling, you feel like you are, because
The armchair
and the
travel.
clients come to us many cases. And we let our young people sit in on the client meetings, so they get to learn.
But I think the other point, you've learned part of the process here, but there's another part of the process that you get a tiny little bit, with loft project, whatever, you get a tiny little bit of exposure to. But there's a lot of craft and nuts and bolts to being a practicing architect, and you'll probably be more valuable to a developer or a contractor working with them if you've learned that nuts and bolts craft part for a couple of years, as Gene says.
Yeah. I mean, detailing is critical. I mean, a lot of talented architects who can't detail well, and their buildings don't look particularly good after a few years, 5, 10, 15. I think great architecture is buildings that look great 50 years out, 100 years out, because they were well detailed and well built. And that's part of our responsibility, not just to, again, doing a fabulous picture or a little model. Got to really work and come together. So detailing is critical, and we like to do super detailing, and we really work at it. So. And you learn that.
I think what you're saying about working in a firm for a few years is absolutely critical, and I support that. On the other hand, I think the fun of being an architect is not that you hang out with other architects.
Oh, no, that's different.
It's that you hang out with everybody else.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, it's being the only architect in that situation where you have something that, is very special and no one else has that, but then you have to get everybody else organized around you. So it's really sad that in architecture school you don't even get to see an engineering student once in a while, or, somebody that you have to communicate with in another language and talk them into thinking that what you're doing is a
Right.
good.
And the fact
That's a
that
real loss.
the fact that you're not doing projects with or taking more courses with the real estate people is
That's insane.
is insane.
It is
I mean,
insane.
here you
Yeah.
are right next to these people
Yeah.
who could end up being your clients later on, where you can build early on a trust and respect relationship.
Or at least understand how their minds work.
Right, and
That's-
where you understand what their
Yeah.
goals are and they understand what yours are, you kind of grow up together. What a fabulous opportunity, and we are kind of missing it mostly,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we
which
do-
is really a mistake.
Yeah, both Penn and Harvard do that, though, between Wharton Design
yeah.
School and Harvard HBS and the Graduate School of Design. You can take cross courses and you work as part of teams.
But what I'm saying is, and maybe they do this too, I'm saying there should be a project where the preservation people,
It is. It is a
but
project.
they do a project together.
There's a project.
Well, that's great, we should do that. You should lobby for it. Look,
Yeah.
you don't understand your
That's
own
right. This is
power.
true.
This is
Yeah.
another case of, if you all got together and petitioned whomever, there'll be a new person to petition soon, you'd get it. You don't understand the power you have. We run this school for you, not vice versa. Other questions? Yes? For what?
Just like a
Columbia
protest.
undergrads do it, they're notorious for protesting.
Ah.
So that's ironic, but, I grew up in business school, I did study architecture for a time at another school, and I felt that within my peer level, I saw a lot of women, but then in the profession, I did not. And it's the thing that is still this big boys club that I have no idea how to be broken, and I'm not sure why, and I'd like to know why.
I think that that's changing a lot. I mean, when my partner and I was here, started hiring people in the mid-'70s, I took to heart a lesson from my sister, who's older and who'd been to Harvard Law School at a time when there were professors who, when women raised their hand, they'd look around and say, well, if nobody knows the answer, we'll move on. They would not. And the dean, who then became the head of Harvard, actually called the 6 women in her class into tea one day and said, look, if it were up to me, you wouldn't be here, because you're just wasting spots that otherwise... So, I mean, the world really has changed a lot, but at that point, in the 70s, my sister said, look, if you hire a woman, you're going to get somebody who's smarter, worked harder, in architecture school, been more prejudiced against, and so on. And so we started hiring women, and our office was almost always was the vast majority of our office was women. Now, Frances was the first president of the AIA and was clearly a leader.
I mean, first woman.
First woman president, sorry. And you know, one of Gene's partners was another president of the AIA, woman, Jill.
But there's a great mystery right now where they're all going. I mean, I've just been reading yesterday in the Architects News. No one can explain what happens. Women students go to work in offices and then they all disappear. That's what you're.
I don't think they disappear. I think there are a lot of.
But it should
there are more
be by now.
That they're they're half the
offices are
students
50-50.
here.
I mean, our offices.
Well, we
actually
have
almost
50%
50-50.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's some mysterious thing going on.
take it.
Yeah. I mean, in academic life, you know, our clients are desperate to hire women. It's actually easier to be a woman right now because academic institutions, state universities, state agencies, federal agencies are forced to hire women and minorities. They have to do it. So if you show up, you know, the world is yours. It's really tough to be a white guy right now and get a job. You know, I mean, watch out. So I'm not kidding about it. I'm not kidding about this. It is tough to be a white guy and get a job for a federal agency right now. This is true. So that you know, turning of everything upside down is making it easier. However, there must be places out there. I don't know. Do you have any big nasty old clients that don't want to see a woman in the room? I mean, I just don't see that.
We
So I
don't.
can't.
We
You don't.
have women at all of these.
So where are they going? I don't know. I mean, the pay is good. The pay is pretty good. They're paying pretty well. I don't. It's some kind of central mystery that no one can figure out.
Well, it's not like a man bears a child.
Yeah, but women lawyers have children too. I'm certain of it. You know.
Are they called little lawyers?
You know. So how does that happen? I don't get it.
Well, I don't know that it's true. I mean, I look at, you know, a lot of firms, you know, have, you know, women partners and so on. I think it's just a matter of time because, you know, realistically, you know, it's only like 25 or 30 years ago, which in the span of a professional culture is a pretty short time.
Yeah.
It's only really 30 years that women have been coming out of architecture school and have been, you know, so on. But you look, more and more firms now are being run by women. Certainly in the last 20 years, you know, as Gene said, half their office is women. So I'm not sure that that's
I think it just works like that. The arbiters of some conversations are still women like that. In terms of just the managed, which in certain aspects is professional. It gives a job. And that's the reason that I think.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah. But I have to say, I mean, in my experience, you don't see that day to day when you're working. You really don't. At least I haven't.
Well.
I mean,
Now also, New York is not the country.
Well, this is true.
You know,
I've heard
you're
this.
realistically.
I've heard
I mean,
this.
this is
Yeah, that's
like
a
a
good
little
point.
country of
That
its
is a
own
good
that pretends to be
No, I
part of the
think
United
that's-
States.
That's very true. That's very, very true.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Jan.
So you emphasize a lot of like the other aspects, like the business, like the Segal leadership with personnel as important. Do you usually find that these people come from an architecture background or outside? Yes, they are from the architecture background. As Paul said, like most of us right now, like, oh, we're starting architects. Do you kind of like discover sometime down the road that you are more the business person?
I don't think anybody. Did any of you come to architecture school to be the business partner in a firm? I don't think anybody starts out that way, but I think after a while you kind of figure out this is what I'm more interested in, or this is what I'm better at, or this is what the firm needs, and I can step up to the plate and do it, and then you find out you like it, or you're good at it.
No, it's,
Well, because I don't think I think I'm possibly the only person in this entire school who says this is a good idea, right? Have you heard this from anybody else? No.
And also, we're pretending as though these people are really like totally different kinds, not.
Right.
Like, I mean, we hire a group of young people in our firm. So it turns out that we have a meeting together and we all decide, well, we're gonna do this thing in this way and this is gonna happen and let's call the engineer and get them in. Well, who steps up to the plate and makes that call to the engineer, and who goes back to their desk and just keeps drawing, right? You see, well, all right, so Nick made the call to the engineer and actually got the guy to show up. That was good. Let's ask Nick to do that next time, because Greg didn't make it happen, So people's, ability to be organized or not organized or think with other people just starts emerging. Or we all agree on something and someone has to draw that door in that wall. Well, it turns out that Nick is on the phone with the engineer and Greg is actually making a really good effort at looking at 4 different ways to put that door in the wall. So different talents and interests start emerging from the beginning. Now, both of them are real architects, real design architects coming to all the meetings and working together in a group, but they have different.
But clearly,
innate
Nick is
skills.
Overcoming what school culture has inculcated. School culture is very corrosive on that.
Yeah. We did it, I think I mentioned
I'm
earlier.
probably going to get fired if this mic is actually working.
We did a little differently, as I mentioned in the beginning. My idea was that everybody should be an architect and do projects. But that was the line duty. I remember I described as line and staff. And the staff one, we had different responsibilities. And one would be to interview, another would be to worry about the business side. It's like if I was on a ship, you say, well, a supply officer, what's he do? But if the guy's a gunnery officer, he's more important. Well, if the supply officer didn't order the food, the weapons, the bullets, the ship wouldn't be out there. So everybody has a role that when they work together makes something possible. And you watch on sports team. One of the great examples, I don't have any American football fans, but, the quarterback usually gets the most publicity. He's throwing all the touchdown passes, he's handsome, looks great. But I tell you what, those 3 or 4 guys in front of him, if they didn't do their job and block, he'd be on his back every day, everybody. And so he depends. Many quarterbacks actually pay these linemen to protect them. They protect them. So he's a leader, looks to be great, but without the 3 or 4 in front of him, he's nobody. So teams are necessary to all work together. Everybody has a position to play. And certain projects, people have really a great skill for design. They may know about schools or university projects. Others technically can detail beautifully and make that building sing. Others can negotiate with the clients, you get the right fee, and manage the job so you're on time, meet the schedule. All that plays a role. I studied with Lou Kohn, and he was a fabulous person. But poor Lou, I remember I tried to defend, I gave a talk in London years later. He was not a businessman. He didn't have anybody who understood business. Now, why should a man who's as great as Lou Kohn and did so much for architecture die poor? That his wife had no money, his daughter has no money. Why should he? Did great things. Because he didn't worry about getting paid. He wasn't a good negotiator.
And he could spend 8 years on schematics.
And he could spend it, exactly. And he would tell a client, well, I'm too busy, come back next year. Well, can you imagine? AT&T approaches you, or IBM or somebody, says, I want my new headquarters. Oh, well, I'm sorry, wait a year. No, they don't do that. So Lou was not the right guy to interface with that kind of work. What he was great at was designing and creating and visualizing, and it was fabulous. But the poor man died poor in a horrible place in a men's room in Penn Station. It was sad. And his wife I knew quite well, and when he came home from the office, she used to have to throw down the money to pay for the taxi. Didn't even have that. So why should such a great person, who is creating great value, and so important in his profession.
And he did so little work, if you think.
Yeah.
He was able to accomplish so little because he couldn't really
Because
get
he
these
didn't have the
jobs
ordinary.
organized.
Yeah, he didn't have an
It's
ordinary.
really, that's the
So
saddest
there's
part.
nothing wrong
Yeah.
that an architectural firm should have a strong
Yeah.
partner who's a good business partner, because it makes it possible to get the work, do better work, and do it well. So just think about it's a team, and any team has different positions. And they, take an orchestra. There's a conductor looking like the superstar, and they probably are. But if the orchestra's not playing well, the
He's not
sound
gonna
isn't
look so
very
good.
good, right? So everybody plays a role. And if you begin to think about the way we all work and live, if everybody is valued for what they contribute, whether you're an architect or a musician or a plumber, it doesn't matter. Everybody plays a role. If they work as a team, then it's going to be a lot better. And if the world actually cooperated as a team, it'd be a lot better.
In fact, I just want to finish that with one sort of scary thought, which is that a lot of our clients don't get it, that I, as the designer, am the most important person on their architectural team. They don't think that. They think the project manager is the most important person on the team. And the designer is someone that is brought in by the project manager at the right moments to, design things when it's necessary. But it's very clear to me that, our clients hire us because we have a whole, we can produce a building, and one of the aspects of producing that
On
building is,
budget, on
oh, look,
time.
here's Frances, she's gonna make a drawing for it. But it's not the only element by a long shot, and
No,
I'm
that's
sure it's
right.
even more true in your
Yeah,
office, where the jobs are so enormous and so
So
complicated.
complex, yeah.
It's not run by the designer.
No.
Yes.
Paul, you talked about periods of adversity in your own time and how your firm doesn't deal with that. So, running up to
It was a much smaller firm, and one could, you could put those questions to a vote. But the other thing that I would, sorry, you didn't finish your question. Oh,
No, let's stay here.
what y'all's advice would be,
you're going to have as many different pieces of advice. I mean, I've always said that and this, you guys are going to throw me out well, we're in the basement, so they can't throw me off the roof. But, I mean, I've
can take
always
you
said
up there,
that growth is an odd concept for a high-quality firm. I mean, my personal view is that growth is a peculiar goal. A much better goal is to figure out how big can you be in the worst of times and stay that size. And when things get really great and busy, just turn away more work and only take the best, most interesting, most profitable work. And then if you've pegged yourself to the size you can be when things are really bad, you just stay that size, because going up and down is expensive, difficult, and so on. Gene's looking at me like I thought I knew this person. I thought he was a sane person. It is a way of doing something. I'm not saying it's the right way or the only way. It's a way. Look, there are 150,000 architects in this country. Are we all the same? Of course not. I mean, so that's one way of doing things.
That's a defense against getting bigger, which we might disagree with.
Right.
But in my limited experience, when there is a downturn, all boats sink together. There is no way to save yourself.
no.
If there's no work, there's no work.
No.
For
But
instance,
there's never no work. There's less
when
work.
after 9/11 in this city for 2 years, there was no work. Right? No
People-
work.
people
in
who-
1973 in this
Right.
city,
Well,
there
we-
was no.
well-
so there
well-
are horrible times in
Yes,
architecture. It's
but
one of
for
the
one thing,
things
I would say
we
that I agree with Gene
you know.
about. Michael and I started in '71, and which was a terrible time, and we thought that was normal. So it's a good idea to start in a bad time, because
Yes,
your expectations are pretty low, and that's your norm, and everything else is just so much better. And then when it goes back to that, we're back to normal again. You thought you knew me, right? So you think I'm a nut job?
So we're in a good patch
Well,
now, so it's a bad time
right.
to start a firm.
Well, the biggest problem is it's very hard for an architectural firm to control its size
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons. One, it's hard to turn down terrific projects, despite what you say.
I didn't say we turned down terrific
No, but if
projects.
they do,
though.
and you want to serve the client, so you have to have the talent and the people to do it. So, okay. And what we did to avoid the truly bad times was in 1985. I was at a conference, and an economist was speaking to a big audience, 5,000 people, and it was to developers, bankers, a few architects. But he said that if you are not global by 1990, half of you will be out of business. And I absolutely believed him. I thought he was talking to me directly, even though it was a big audience. And I went back to Shelley and Bill. I said, we've been really just staying local. But I can see already things are starting to slow. We're not getting as many calls. I think we need to start looking elsewhere, Europe and Asia. And they were not as excited about the idea because they liked the smaller idea. But I convinced them that we should go to London and eventually Asia. So by 1988, we landed Goldman Sachs headquarters in London, won a competition in Frankfurt, and then in 1989, we're invited to Tokyo by a Japanese corporation, and then eventually got this big job in Nagoya. And then that led to, I said, well, we're going to go to Tokyo, let's go to Hong Kong on the same ticket. And we landed eventually a big job in Hong Kong and eventually Shanghai, and that's, But the good point is that every recession, we have been busy because China in the last 15, 20, since 1990, China has been a very busy market. Tokyo was Japan for a while. Korea extremely busy. Singapore. So the whole Asian market is growing. If you look at where the population growth is, it's in Asia. It's over 2 billion going to be in the next 15, 20 years. Africa will be another place. It's not here. It's not in Europe. And so we decided, well, we're doing reasonably well in Europe, that we really had to be in Asia and eventually the Mideast. We're doing a $9 billion airport in Abu Dhabi, and we're the only architect. So and you're not going to turn that down, particularly with an exciting architectural commission. So you start to hire more people. Now, the dilemma that you get to is that you get to be that big, serving 26 nations. You have to hope that there's enough in the world to keep you busy, because we can service clients from London or New York, any place in the world, and do. I'll give you one secret that I learned from, we were working for Lou Gerstner of IBM, and we did a building where he was a new headquarters at Armonk in 1993 we started. He had just taken over IBM, and IBM had crashed. And Lou Gerstner turned it around. The stock went from like 40 to 200, which was due to our building, actually.
Entirely.
Entirely to the building. But what he told me, besides, he wanted to change their culture. And he designed the building so it could never be expanded. He said IBM got too fat at top. But he said he changed the way IBM worked worldwide. And this is what we had copied. So I'll share it. He said that IBM, no company can have every office equal to the other. In other words, you can't have an office in New York, London, Tokyo, San Francisco, Chicago. It doesn't, all equal. Impossible. Something's going to be better or worse. But when clients call IBM, they ought to get the best of IBM. They shouldn't just get the local office. What he did is he said London will become the headquarters for all banking. Any problem with banking is handled by London. And the people from London will send a team to Tokyo to work with the local office of IBM, but they get the experts to solve the problem. And New York became head of communications. So I said, well, that's a brilliant idea, because wherever you are in the world, you get the best of IBM in that place, coupled with the local to follow through. So we have a number of offices that can't all be equal. So if it's a museum or if it's a certain building type, the expertise is in New York. We send 3 or 4 people, but the key person, to the other office, and they work in London, or they work in Shanghai, or they work in Hong Kong with the local. So the client gets the best of the firm. If the talent's in London or the talent's in Shanghai, we move it around. So people are prepared in our firm to relocate for periods of time to do certain projects. The effect is that the clients are excited because they're getting the talent and the experience they really wanted to hire. Because how could somebody in Shanghai have the same experience of a 25-year person, not old, but with the firm, doing major buildings in New York, and then we do a tower in Shanghai, we have to use the talent, right? So then, but the talent now out of Shanghai, because we've done so many towers there, on the tall building is equal or better than any other place. So we use those people. So it's a firm that has, if you like to travel, it's like being in the Navy. We can move you around. But it has worked to minimize the amount of people we have to hire. Mm-hmm. And it keeps us strong wherever in the world the markets are good. So but that's due to Lou Gerstner, not me. I mean, I copied it.
Well, but you had the brains to listen to the person who, I mean, you get lots of advice, most of which you should discard immediately. The trick is to know which pieces of advice you listen to and which pieces say, that's rubbish.
Right.
Okay, one last question, then we'll let you get to studio. David.
So one of the things I know about your firm is that we have this
staff to do research that's not connected with a project. That's one of the big problems with having an office where 30, 40 people say, we can't really do that. So all of our research is related to particular projects, and it's extensive, but we're drawing on research from outside of the firm. I would say that's a real limit of the size of our firm. I'm hoping you're going to have a better answer.
No, I mean, it's usually the project that initiates the research.
Well, so that's-
Because depending where in the world it is and what the challenge is, whether it's environmental, whether it's sun problems, whatever it might be, or complexity over building over something else. Do a lot of projects building over existing structures. And so we do the research, frankly, related to that project. Now, once we've done that research, we do have people that enhance it, and then we keep it as part of our files. But we don't have a special department that says, well, let's see, what should we look at today? We don't do that.
But you know, that's really
That's the role
interesting.
of the university,
But
actually.
but even there, I don't think we play a very significant role. When you look at medicine, for instance, or most other professions or businesses, you know, I mean, think of where Merck or Pfizer would be if they didn't do a whole lot of research that wasn't project specific. It's not like a bunch of patients go to them and say, you know, we've got this disease, please come up with a cure. They know what all the diseases are. They're busy trying to, you know, and they invest huge amount in R&D.
Sure.
But construction is not like that. Construction doesn't invest anything really. You know, manufacturers do, but construction as an industry,
Stayed
and
pretty much the same.
you know, it's pretty pathetic.
Romans did a
So,
better job.
so what that means, to me at least, is this is low-hanging fruit, and this is a fabulous opportunity that we have that the doctors don't have. The doctors don't have it because they're all out doing it already. We're not out doing it, so what an incredible opportunity. If you had a much better way to do a construction project, and you went out to venture capitalists and said, here's a better way to do the largest part of the American economy, construction, you could raise a whole pile of VC money. Does any architecture firm do that? No, because we're thinking very small, quite
Well,
frankly.
Here in Timberlake.
Yes, but, yes, they take a portion of their fee.
Yeah.
Do they go out, do they have a great idea and go out and sell it to a venture capital
Well,
firm?
no, and I mean, I'm a huge admirer of their work, but I think that because their research ultimately is related to individual buildings too, it rises or falls on the success of that
Right.
project. So it's,
No, I think that's true.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Right here.
I was just gonna say that research also relates to grants that people get within the firm, so it's partially, I work in there because that's where I take this role, so I was on the research team. So part of it is project related, and part of it is also like the director of research got a grant to write a book, and that fueled a lot of other
Right.
projects within the firm, so
But-
it's academic and.
But we're thinking with the wrong number of zeros,
yeah, yeah,
to put it bluntly.
yeah.
And because our ideas are too small and we're not tackling things, we need a Fred Smith.
You have a question? No. I thought you kept raising.
You did all year long. What happened to you today? Okay, yes. Paul.
Advice for like small firms that are starting out, as far as a proportion of public sector work, private sector work, or individual owners, kind of what the balance is for you guys when you first started, or even what the market is?
Oh,
I'll
Let me
just tell
answer
you
that
both
in a
something about this guy.
Yeah.
He raised a lot of money through Kickstarter to do something.
to do something. Looks like.
No.
It's not a building. I'm going to give an answer that the key to doing anything in your office is to take the fee that you've been given, divide it by an hourly rate, and say to yourself, this means I can put 240 hours of work into this job and do okay. And when you get to 240, then you have to say to yourself, well, all right, it's a really important job, I'll let it go 10% over, but I won't just keep working. So I think the real answer is that a fee pays for people to do work. And if you can't make that connection in your head, you can't be an architect. And it doesn't
No, I
matter
see.
who's paid you the fee or how it came in or what the negotiation, you've got to be objective. You got to say to yourself, but wait a minute, we're going to run out of money and we don't have the answer yet. That's why every firm that fails, because they just don't they're like, oh, look, a check came in today, let's keep working. You've got, there's a relationship. That's.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience the other day, and I'm going to end on this. But I had to give a talk in a small town called Pedersen, Italy, which is on the border of Switzerland. And I did it because one of the architects had heard me speak in Milan and said, please, please. And I eventually did it for their association. And it was at a museum. It was a lovely evening. And I realized I during the day had met a lot of architects. And the largest firm I was addressing was 14 people. And the place was full, about 200, 150 people. And I went visiting to the woman who was in charge of the AIA, their AIA, but different. And her grandfather had started the firm. Her father was next in line, and then she became the leader, and her sister, they were partners. And it was just a wonderful thing to see this office, which was her grandfather's, still in practice, and the wonderful things they were doing, small-scale, sensitive, beautiful restorations. And I actually felt a little jealous because, but awkward, because I was about to do a PowerPoint showing towers and projects that were enormous. And so I said, I don't think I feel right doing this because the largest project you're doing would fit in one of the rooms that we're in one of our buildings. And I didn't, that was extreme. But, and she said, no, we really want to see that. We're excited by the things we don't do. We want to see what's happening around the world. Now, fortunately, I put a bit of humor in it because I did a story, a little bit about our firm, which they wanted, but I did a story on the history of the tall building, which actually goes back to 280 BC in Alexandria. But one of the earliest towns was San Gimignano, was building towers, and the ego of the individuals was making them higher. And then I began to talk about sculpture, and buildings that are now leaning and twisting and hunched over, and which I have a problem with for tall buildings. But so I said, but the Italians were one of the first. So I showed the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I said they all broke up. I tried to make it more. I said, but they never really intended that, and I showed it straight. And then, of course, but unfortunately, they can't solve the problem. So, but the point is, by the time we were done, I made them feel, we talked about history and things, but the projects I showed were very large scale. I had some small ones, but they actually came up and they so appreciate it because they don't get the chance to either tackle them, design them, or even see them. And so it was like a wonderful experience, and it made me feel good. But at first I felt, how can I show this stuff and their biggest project is, $1 million or 3 million euros or something, and I'm showing $1 billion project. But it worked out. So the point, my real point was I had a great respect for the small firm and the quality of what they do. Because let me say, whatever you do as an architect, I don't care whether it's a small kitchen renovation to a small restaurant to a house, whatever you do it well, it's important for the people who are going to experience it. So maybe we do stuff that thousands of people experience, but nothing wrong with three or four people coming away and feeling good about what you've done. So everybody can play a key role. You don't have to do what we do to be a great architect or a good firm, but you want to, I agree with Fred, you can't stay in business unless you make sufficient money to pay your people, pay the rent, and have something to eat with. Otherwise, it really doesn't work. So.
I'd like to thank Francis and Gene for being so generous with your time and your thoughts. Where can I take you? Down the block?
No, I'm going to go
No,
I got to
we're
run.
talking about-
No. I don't mean lunch today. No, I have to head out.
No, that's great.
I did have a question, but it wasn't very close. So I thought it was
Actually, are you still working for Brown?
Actually, at this exact moment, no.
Not right now.
Not right now.
Yeah, because I went to undergrad there.
Oh, really?
And I actually worked for Richard Fishman after I
Oh.
graduated for a couple of years
fantastic.
on
Right.
helping with the skates building.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you guys ever saw, we built a model and did like a stop motion animation for him.
No, I never did see that.
It was kind of one of those things where he was like, we want to do we want to have animation that will get people more excited. And I was like, don't the architects have like renderings, animation? No, we want to build a physical, we built like a 316
No,
building,
when you
and then
go
build
with
this
it, try to get
stop
more.
motion animation, but just like 3 months. But it was like, because we were working down in Talk. Yeah, so.
And then you created, you suggest
From there to here directly.
Yeah, just talking, nothing to show.